Hi, and welcome to Tom Kennedy Science, and I'm your host, Dr. Tom Kennedy. So this lecture is a continuation on my plant form and function, and specifically it's a continuation of roots, shoots, and leaves. And what I'm going to talk about here are the shoots and the leaves. Now, of course, we know that we call the shoots stems, right? And they raise and they separate the leaves, exposing them to light, and then the leaves, well, they absorb sunlight. But, 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 there's always exceptions. We know this. Guess what? Leaves and stems can do other things besides what their primary purpose can do. Besides their primary purpose. Imagine that. Plants, with all their immense diversity, can do so many different things. Now, I always talk about this mythical diversity here. But let's just look at the differences in size of plants. Yeah, that's a little bullfrog in a pond. That green pond scum is not really pond scum at all. It's duckweed. It's like the world's smallest flowering plant. It's tiny. I mean, well, you can see that frog's only about yay big. And then look over there to the right. That is the sequoia trees from Sequoia National Forest in California. They are enormous. In fact, the largest one, General Sherman, is the size of 42,000 blue whales or 40,000 people. That's a tree with more biomass than all of most universities, except your really big universities. But there you go. I mean, I feel like a tiny little guy walking around in a forest of giants. Now, as we talk about stems, the shoot system, which includes the leaves as well, there's some vocabulary we need to get down. One is the shoot system. This is made up of all of your stems. So there's a picture of a forest from North Georgia, and you can see all of the stems in their branching patterns. And of course, they hold on to the leaves. Now, most of the time, leaves are there for photosynthesis, mostly. And then we have a node. A node is where a leaf attaches to a stem. And then you have an internode. And of course, the internode is, well, between nodes, right? Inter means between. And then we have, at the tips of our stems, we have something called apical bud. And this is where a stem is elongating. So I walked out in my yard right before this lecture, right before I was making this video to take this photo of a New Mexico locust growing. And you can see the apical bud, and that's where the branch is growing. And then you can see the auxiliary buds, which are at the base of a node, right, where a leaf is growing out, and that can grow into another stem. Can. And we'll find out why. There's some chemical signaling there that will prevent that apical bud from actually growing into a stem. That's why if you ever prune a tree and you get all these branches, we'll talk about that in another lecture. So let's take a look at the many functions of stems. They're there to support the leaves. Not so fast. They do more. Okay, stolons. These are modified stems that grow along the ground. And they land, and they send out roots, and they grow into another plant. Or you could have rhizomes that grow underground. You ever notice like grass just kind of pops up around your yard? That's rhizomes. These are underground stems and also allow the plant to reproduce asexually. Wait, so plants can reproduce asexually? They can. And we saw how they did it with the roots as well. Plants reproducing asexually by sending out roots, and you can also have them reproduce asexually by using the stems, whether it's a stolon above ground or a rhizome growing underground. You're above ground, you're exposed to sunlight. So some limbs are modified to do photosynthesis and storage. So if you live out here in the desert Southwest, or you can go to the Southeast too and find small cacti that live in sandy areas, but cactus are highly modified plants, and the stem is your cactus pad. And that's a cactus pad on the left, that's a cholla on the right, and those are the stems. They are not only storing water and other minerals and nutrients, they are also the site of photosynthesis. That's pretty cool. So in a cactus, the leaves are not doing photosynthesis. And of course, this is a Palo Verde tree from Arizona on the left. And because it's green, guess what? It's photosynthetic. And when it rains and gets a little bit cooler, it'll actually put out leaves to augment how much photosynthesis this plant can do. And of course, you can have stems that will put out thorns, like on this acacia tree, and their thorns prevent herbivory. Now, stems can also be used for storage. Now, a potato is an underground rhizome that's modified into storing carbohydrates. Now, this is different. This is different from a sweet potato. They're in completely different families. A sweet potato is actually a root, and it's related to morning glories. You know, the vines that have those big, pretty flowers? Yeah, but this is not. These are underground rhizomes. And in fact, if you've ever seen the eye on a potato, you can cut the potato apart, put it in water, or plant it, and that eye will grow into a new plant. And potatoes, they store carbohydrates, and they are yummy. I mean, mashed potatoes, French fries, hash browns, you name it. And if you're going to make a stew, you got to have potatoes in your stew. There's other trees where the stems, the main trunk, are also quite swollen. These are Boabab trees. This is from Madagascar, but they also grow in parts of Africa and Australia. And in these areas, they have very strong seasonal patterns of rainfall. So you've got a wet season and a dry season. So here with these plants, the trunk is greatly enlarged to store water during the dry season. So as you can see now, stems can be modified for asexual reproduction, photosynthesis, and storage. They're not there just to support the leaves in some plants. Now, leaves, they're flattened surfaces. They're used for photosynthesis, right? Absorb sunlight. And this is where you also have a lot of your cellular metabolism taking place, where the plants are producing a lot of their secondary metabolites. Wait, secondary metabolites. Here I go again with those big words. Secondary just means second. So a primary metabolite is something the plant makes first. Well, the thing they make first is carbohydrates, like glucose. So, they take carbon dioxide, fix that into glucose. That's a primary metabolite. Secondary means it comes afterwards. And the word metabolite, think metabolism. Metabolism is chemical reactions. So after the plant fixes carbon dioxide into a glucose molecule, it'll make other chemicals secondarily through chemical processes, hence secondary metabolite. And, a large tree could have thousands and thousands of these leaves absorbing sunlight and fixing carbon dioxide and making carbohydrates and other secondary metabolites. Now, as you can imagine, like the roots, like the stems, leaves are incredibly varied. And in fact, they can even be varied on the same tree. You might have smaller leaves up at the top of the tree that are exposed to a lot of sunlight. Down lower in the canopy where there's less sunlight, the trees might be larger. So there's lots of variability in leaves. So we have what is called a simple leaf. There's the node, and that's where a leaf comes off the stem. And at the base of that is also the axillary bud that can potentially become another stem. But there's this other thing called a petiole, and this is what attaches the leaf to the stem. So a simple leaf, there's just one leaf attached to the petiole, attached to the stem. You might have a compound leaf. So a lot of like your mimosas, catclaw acacias, these things that are related to pea plants, well, actually, they are pea plants, they're legumes. They have compound leaves. And it's a compound leaf because even though you've got what looks like leaves, those are leaflets. They're attached to a central petiole. And the petiole is attached to the stem at the node where there's an axillary bud. And then you can even have doubly compound leaves as well. And then in pine trees and conifers, we have needles. Needles are a really good adaptation for a drier environment. And adult needles, they can live 1.5 years, a year and a half, to almost 40 years. I know it's hard to believe that there are needles out there almost as old as me. So if you're in the tropics, you're probably going to keep your needles for about a year and a half. But if you're a bristlecone pine, living up on a mountainside in this harsh environment, you might hold on to your needles for up to 40 years. And needles are also adapted to fire in some species. I know that I said that fire is a problem out west. It's a problem for multiple reasons. One is we're way drier than we used to be, and we've had some issues with our past forest management. So we have a lot of trees really close together, and in the east, fire's been almost completely removed from most forests. So it's grown up with lots of hardwood trees in between. So when we get fires, they're pretty bad. They can be catastrophic. But fires used to be an integral part of our ecosystems in both parts of the southeast and in the west, meaning these ecosystems depended on fire. And if you have an ecosystem that depends on fire, guess what? Plants adapt, including pine trees. They have thick bark to protect them. And like the longleaf pine in the southeast of the United States, those pine needles will drop to the forest floor and they're kind of flammable. So they help carry a fire. Now, the difference is these are small, low intensity fires that don't get up into the canopy and they don't burn the stand down to the ground. So, that's part of the problem is our fires are much more intense now. So now let's talk about the many functions of leaves. They do photosynthesis, right? Ha, they do more. You ever seen a grapevine or a pea vine growing on the side of a house or on a fence? I just planted a grapevine on a fence line where I live. You'll notice there's a leaf and then there's this long thing coming next to it. That is a tendril. And that tendril is a modified leaf that helps that vine hold on to some other physical structure. So the vine can grow up a tree, it can grow along a fence row, it can grow up onto your house. I wouldn't really recommend vines growing on your house because that can cause you problems, but they can definitely grow up in the trees and they can grow along other structures. And it's those tendrils, those modified leaves that help hold that vine to those structures. How many of you like garlic and onions? I mean, let's saute up some onions, right? Garlic. How can you cook a lot of meals without garlic? And then how many of you like flowers? Like I like lilies and irises and daffodils. I'm always planting bulbs. I love flowers. Well, if you're eating an onion, I think Shrek called himself an onion. We have layers. Those layers are leaves. Onions and garlic and other bulbs are underground leaves modified for storage. So a lot of these plants will go into a dormant state, and when the spring comes around, they'll send up a new plant from the bulb. Pretty cool, isn't it? So leaves are not always just used for photosynthesis. And I mean, next time you open up an onion and you start peeling off every layer, because ogres are like onions. We have layers. Those layers are leaves. And oh, by the way, garlic and onions, very good for you. Flowers and greenery, good for your mental health. Cactus. Here we're coming back to cactus again. Yeah, the stems, they are what is doing photosynthesis and the storage. The leaves in a cactus don't do photosynthesis hardly at all, if at all. They're just modified into thorns to keep the cactus from being eaten. I know, because you get all this water and minerals you're storing in it. So you make these thorns to keep things from eating you. It's kind of serendipitous here. But thorns can also help slow down water loss because they slow the airflow across the stem. They can keep it a little bit more humid in there, do more photosynthesis throughout the day. Now, other leaves from succulents, like aloe, right? Aloes are these big fleshy leaves, and they're enlarged because they're doing water storage. Now, on these plants, not only are these succulents storing water and minerals, they're also doing photosynthesis as well. And if you've ever wondered if a plant is doing photosynthesis, is it green, right? If it's got chlorophyll, it's green, it's doing photosynthesis. Christmas time, you go get your beautiful poinsettia with those bright red flowers. Wait, flowers? Those are not flowers. Well, the flowers are those little tiny things right in the middle. The big red, actually they're not petals. They're called bracts. And those are modified leaves to help attract pollinators. So kind of cool. Oh wait, there's more that leaves can do. Remember when I told you about these floating plants This is a water hyacinth. And this plant came from South America. It got introduced to Florida. It's a really bad invasive species. Where I live out in the middle of a desert, I actually throw it in my pond because it grows very well. One of the fastest growing plants we know about. And here you can see some of the modified leaves are in these round bulbs. And what they do is they help the plant float on top of the water. So yeah, if we could ever learn to harvest these things for food, that'd be fantastic because they're easy to harvest. Just pull them out of the water. You can, and of course, you have other types of floating leaves like a pond lily. Now, a pond lily has these enlarged leaves that float on the surface and they intercept sunlight. But the difference between them and a floating plant like the water hyacinth or water lettuce, they actually have roots that are growing from the bottom. Okay, here's a good one coming up next. Wait for it. Wow, there are carnivorous plants, and they're carnivorous because of modified leaves. This is a pitcher plant. So a lot of plants in the southeast and in other areas of the world that live in kind of swampy areas where the water is a bit acidic, it makes it really difficult for these plants to extract nutrients. They can get plenty of water. They just can't get the nitrogen and the phosphorus and the other nutrients they need. So they evolved carnivory. So the pitcher is a modified leaf that holds water. Insect flies in there, gets stuck inside, falls down, drowns. The leaf releases digestive enzymes and then absorbs the insect or whatever animal that fell in there for extra nutrients. Here's another one. This is a sundew plant. Those sticky round things, that's trichomes, they're full of like sugars. Insect lands on it trying to get a meal, can't fly away. The plant will literally wrap up around it and digest it. And then, of course, the most famous of all the carnivorous plants is probably the Venus flytrap. Once again, a modified leaf that if you trigger a couple of those hairs on the underside of that leaf, it'll close shut, capturing whatever's in there. It releases digestive enzymes. And of course, it digests it for extra nutrients. And the way that this leaf works is pretty interesting. It uses an electrical signal to communicate with the cells. That's like how our cells work. That's how our neurons work. So I'll talk more about that in a later lecture. And like I said, swamps, when they become acidic, it affects their ability of plants to uptake nutrients. So we will talk about that when we get to nutrient uptake. But this is a picture of a swamp from the southeast. There are lots of different types of carnivorous plants in here. Okay. Well, I hope you enjoyed this lecture on the shoots and the leaves. They're a bit more variable than you would think, right? And so stay tuned for later lectures when I start going in to the physiology about how a root absorbs nutrients, how the vascular system moves nutrients from the roots to the leaves and the leaves down to the roots, and then how the leaves actually work themselves. So that's going to be more lectures coming up soon. So stay tuned. It's been another episode of Tom Kennedy Science.